本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？見えないよ。
What's good, Internet? It's March 5th, 2022, and you are listening to Waypoint Radio, episode 472. I'm your host, Rob Zachney, and I'm joined by Patrick Klepek.
Hi.
Renata Price.
Howdy, gamers.
Our producer, Ricardo Contreras.
Yo.
So we are all playing, Ren at least, we are playing, and Patrick, you've also touched Weird West a little bit as well, but we're both kind of into some semi-roguelike, immersive simi type game, or at least run-based immersive simi games. Let's start off with Weird West a little bit, because we only touched on that briefly on Friday after Patrick and I had done a bit of streaming. But this morning, Ren was also telling me about a game called Abermore, which seeing it immediately stoked all my enthusiasm and nostalgia. But I gather maybe I should hold my horses just a little bit. So, Patrick, did you also play a little bit of Weird West, or have you only touched what we did on stream?
No, I only touched what we did on the... I've heard that game has Steam Deck issues, like it doesn't perform well. Like the game itself has like performance issues, so I ended up not getting time to spend with it this weekend. But I thought the most interesting thing about the arc of our stream, which I think was like really fun. I think we came out of that going, oh wow, this game that I thought might be kind of a quaint curiosity from some ex-Dishonored devs, dang, like maybe they're really onto something here. Like this seems like a lot more than I had anticipated. And then you went off and played a couple more hours, and your reaction to me was when you weren't there to like goad me into doing like stupid shit or like doing things for the stream to like, well, I would never do this if this is my real playthrough. That it sounded like you were having less fun with it, and I'm curious if that has changed in between then and now.
It has. It's leveled off a bit. I'm
Okay.
having more fun with it, but I do still think some of those issues persist. To refresh people on it, Weird West is a game published by Devolver, developed by Wolf-Eye Studio.
Publishers of the new Monkey Island game.
Wait, what?
And
Really?
increasingly everything else.
It was announced today. Like Ron Gilbert made good on like a 15-year April Fool's joke. That he said, I will announce that I'm making a new Monkey Island on April Fool's. And then did. No one believed him. And then as we're recording this today, it was announced that Devolver is teaming with Lucas and Gilbert's studio to make a new Monkey Island that comes out later this year.
That's a good bet. That's a good bet.
Very good bet.
Anyway, this was led by Raf Colantonio's studio, Wolf-Eye. Colantonio, was one of the leads on the Dishonored series. And the pitch for this was it was a RPG immersive sim tactics game to an extent. I think I saw somebody on Twitter talking about how in terms of pacing, this is actually really reminiscent of games like Fallout 2, which I think is actually a really good pull, because my initial inclination was to connect it to games like, Commandos or, what's that? Shadow Tactics, games like that. But I think the pacing is just relaxed enough, or if I'm maybe feeling more pejorative, slack enough, that the big sprawling slow-paced 90s RPG comparison is maybe a little more apt than the sort of third-person stealth tactics game analogy. But Weird West, it is a game set in sort of a cosmic eldritch horror version of the Wild West, and it is a place where magic is real, and everyone basically knows this. People know that like death is not an absolute condition in this world. It's very like, honestly, it very much is, if you can imagine like Dishonored being like the old world. If you imagined a like Western frontier set in the same like universe, it would probably feel a lot like Weird West, where everyone's just kind of coping with the fact that like,
they play it straight in a way that is like on its own naturally elicits a lot of really enjoyable humor. I think like someone noted in the chat when we first streamed, it was like, oh, here's a newspaper clipping where they just say Eldritch. Like, that's just common language, baby. Like, everyone just knows there are cosmic horrors behind, every door. And that lends itself by playing it straight, a lot of color to the world that I found very humorous. And probably is like helpful for a game in terms of like, it's a game that does not lack ambition, but you can make that mistake when you look at like an overhead game relative to, a more like, sprawling 3D first person game like Dishonored.
I actually have a question. How much did either of y'all fuck with Wasteland 2 and 3, if at all?
No.
Didn't.
Okay, because whenever I look at this game, it's very easy to say getting big Wasteland vibes. But when you're talking about that Fallout 2 comparison, the only comparison I've been able to take into watching it is something like Wasteland 2 or 3, which are turn-based, more character RPG style, with like a tactics layer on top of them. Games that released in the last few years as sequels to the original game Wasteland, which was a like fundamental inspiration for Fallout. And whenever I see Weird West, I think of it as a more actiony and more your isometric action style game version of what Wasteland is doing, and trying to kind of combine the active motion and like systemic clicking of immersive sims with the like basic structure of a CRPG.
Yeah, I would say so. From what I understand of like where Wasteland, particularly where that series ended up, because Matthew Galt is a big proponent of that. It does seem like Wasteland increasingly became interested in really in broad like satire and metaphor.
Yeah.
Weird West has a sense of humor for sure, but it's definitely trying to play it a little more straight. I think it's somewhere in the in some ways it is somewhere between like maybe what I hear about Wasteland 3 and like the old Fallout games in terms of tone. But yeah, so like Patrick and I had a fun stream with it where, the game opens. Actually, before the opening even, your character is marked by a coven, let us say, of like some kind of witches and sorcerers in some sort of like different plane of existence. And then she wakes up in the real world of Weird West, and her husband has been kidnapped and her child killed. But crucially, and I'm not sure they brought this through very well, Patrick, in the playthrough, your character has no memory according to like what is coming out in this game. Like of
their family, like
yeah.
You're supposed to. I know I'm supposed to love these people, but what is that love? Other people need to inform me.
Right. Your character comes to after sort of being like literally branded by these other beings, and then you are launched on the trail of this gang that slaughtered your character's family, even though you have no real memory of them. Ren.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so you're saying it's fine and normal and cool to sell your son's teddy bear after he gets fucking eaten in front of you. I know you didn't. You didn't, but
the game is smart enough. When you hit sell all junk, your wedding ring and your teddy bear are never sold.
Oh,
that's good.
Despite being labeled as junk. And that's actually a smart call. Because otherwise, boy, would you have some game dissonance from selling
it also was like an interface issue.
Toy.
Where like Rob was trying to sell enough to buy some shit. And it's like, okay, well, we want to use the junk option, but I guess we can't use the junk option because we don't want this teddy bear to disappear for like character reasons. And so that's actually really neat that the game acknowledges that is probably not. It may feel like junk to you right now because you have no emotional connection to it, but you intellectually, I should not get rid of this teddy bear.
So what Patrick and I played were some opening missions, like infiltrate a camp being run by the Stillwater gang. This group of people have been abducting people out in the Weird West. As you go deeper into it, it definitely turns out
they're cannibals. I want to make sure like they're like this. They're eating these people. They're not just like taking them, like robbing them and like killing them. Like they're also slowly slicing off their flesh to consume.
Well, even that's so. Pat, as I played more, even that's getting weird. It's I'm less certain. Are the Stillwaters a cannibal gang, or are they just like procurement contractors for the cannibals. Like this is
okay. All right.
So
that's
as
good.
you go through, it turns into a chain of like, well, who's actually behind this? What's actually going on? And it is so you go from place to place on this overworld map, and it's pretty dense. Like there's a lot of locations that are revealed to you over the course of the game. Usually there's a plot thing going on there the first time you visit them, but you will be given call to go back. And in terms of the way, like, and this was kind of the pitch for the game, in addition to the fact that, you know, you can do all the, you know, Wild West gunslinger shit that you're used to. You know, you got your Winchester lever action rifle, your revolver, etc. You can also get both, like, try to remember the game's two terms of arts. You have a character specific like move set basically that you get via collecting relics on the map, and the aesthetics for all this are very Dishonored, right? Like magic looks like Dishonored magic. The shit you find in the world that is like imbued with magical potential, straight out of like Outsider relics in Dishonored. It's very much a game that stems from a, you know, honestly, we fucking nailed it in Dishonored, so why no need to reconsider?
Just put this shit in the West and call it a day. What are they? What are those developers going to do? Sue me? I helped create Dishonored.
And so what you get via that stuff is right now, for instance, my character has a weapon ability that is powered via her magic for her rifle, where when you aim with the rifle, and remember this is all, yes, it's sort of third person high angle camera, you know, it's what we might call like twin stick, but obviously you're playing with mouse and keyboard, and I hear it actually is better with mouse and keyboard. But
I've heard the gun stuff better with mouse and keyboard. The like finagling with the menu stuff clearly made for a gamepad, and then that's where like
That's
those
a bad
two diverge.
hey, that's a bad combo. Hey,
But also from what I've read is that like it also means if you're playing a mouse and keyboard, like the difficulty is also clearly tuned for like the lesser aiming you would have on a gamepad, whereas with a mouse and keyboard you're just going like ping 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 in a way that the game is not necessarily accounting for.
That is one thing I meant to ask Rob about as having played further, because I was producing that stream. Yeah, that game seems real fucking easy. It seems kind of easy to just like brat your way through and absolutely not have to think about anything.
Yeah, so the way they balance against that is bullet sponges. I'm not sure it's a good solution, but I went to this place where you run to this corrupt like politician / tycoon, and my initial reaction was like, this guy's got like a half dozen guards. Fuck this guy. I'm just gonna like kill him and take his shit and like get what I need from this location. And this time I open fire, and my shots are taking like a pixel off their health bars at best. And it's like, okay, so now I literally cannot avoid enough incoming fire to deal with these guys. So I'm gonna have to take a different approach. And I think that is this Weird West right now feels to me like there's a whole lot of places where when you haven't found like the more elegant, like either plot driven solution or more creative solution via your character abilities, the way the game lets you know that and kind of punishes you is you have a really boring combat encounter. And I think that is kind of a weakness. I think, Patrick, when I messaged you about it feeling way more slack, part of it was there were so many places I was going on little missions, and I was like, I don't even know what, like, let's just move the plot along. I'm just gonna like steamroll these guys, and we'll move on to the next location, because there's just
thought about investing 2 upgrades into the jump ability though.
I've started to, because like they're putting things on rooftops that look tempting.
So they're like, okay, so to make it clear to people, so like in this game there is a jump that, you know, on its face is used for like, you know, leaping over like a chasm or something. And then there are upgrades, 2 upgrades to the jump. And I remember asking in chat, like, does anyone have a sense of like, what does that mean? Like, what is it? Because it doesn't really demonstrate that in the UI. Like, if I was to invest in this, like, what does that mean? Is it just like, because it does say like higher jump, less fall damage. It's like, okay, like I could probably just deal with that though. And people are like, no, if you upgrade it twice, you can fucking scale to the top of a building and just like leap like you're Superman. I was like, that sounds, if it's a game in which the combat encounters on their own are not going to provide enough dynamic elements to make them all interesting, it seems like the game is then encouraging you to have builds that give you more options to do things on your end. And maybe that's an issue if you have to bring that much to the table to make the combat interesting while you're waiting for the plot to do its thing. But that did strike me as one of those, like, I could see myself in my playthrough just immediately like sprinting towards the jumps, because that just seems like a very funny way to approach a bunch of encounters.
Yeah, and I'm just not sure, like, I still have yet to find anything that really excites me about, like, how these, like, what possibilities these abilities bring into the world. So, for instance, there's still so many encounters where it's like, the bandit camp is also a chemical weapons and TNT barrel depot. Like,
right, because we built in these environmental systems that we need you to have reasons to mess with all the time.
Right. Like, it sure would be a shame if somebody, like, I don't know, shot that oil barrel and spilled the oil everywhere and then blew up the lamp nearby and caused the entire thing to ignite. But in the time it takes me to do that, I could also just headshot everybody I'm trying to kill. So it, like, the game does run into that problem. Now, against, like, more tougher camps of enemies and such, now you do want to start clearing it a little more easily. But even there, what tends to be more effective than a lot of your abilities is also doing the stealth, like creep up, choke someone out, hide them in a bush. Very, very Dishonored. But here it doesn't. It's not as tight, right? And, like, I think one of the other things that Dishonored is very good at is you always had the sense of in each location, in each encounter, there were so many like clearly viable different approaches and tactics you could take. And here, sometimes it doesn't feel like they are well thought out enough. Like, for instance, and this is a spoiler for your first run of the game, your first character. It's something I was doing just before we podcasted here. So there's a point where you get another lead on where your husband might be. You go to this town, and it's been taken over by the Still Waters. It's an unusual location because usually ghost towns can be taken over by bandits, but then they don't have any of the functions of a town. There's no, like, saloon where you can rest. There's no shopkeepers, etc. This one still has some of that. But basically the Still Waters are holed up. They've taken over the bank, and they've used the bank's architecture to make it sort of their fort. And you're given a few approaches. You can, for instance, poison the guard on the front door and get in that way, at least, without starting a shootout. Or you can do what I did, which was challenge somebody to a duel. And once you kill this, like, Stillwater duelist, you are now, like, seen as cool enough for the gang to, like, say, hey, why don't you come upstairs and, like, we'll recruit you. But then you go in there, and I tried multiple times to, like, solve this. If you talk to the gang leader, she knows who you are. So she'll get as far in the conversation of, like, you want to join the gang? And you're like, sure. And she's like, wait a second, you're the bounty hunter that's been after us. And immediately you're in the shootout. Okay, so that's not going to work. Maybe I could have done something differently where, like, they wouldn't know I'm on their trail. I don't know. But, like, to me, it seems like there's no way to sort of, like, bald-faced lie your way through this encounter. Mm-hmm. But I realized, like, she's got this weird, like, little route she's walking in the upstairs of the bank. So I just walked into her office while she was out of it, picked the key up off the desk for the jail cell she's operating, walk over, release a couple NPCs. And then again, for reasons I can't quite parse, she, like, locked onto me, trying to initiate that plot conversation about, like, hey, why don't you join the gang? To the point where I'm, like, actively trying to avoid her. I'm, like, walking, like, outside around the town. She's, like, stalking me, but not as hostile. She is just trying to offer me this job. Wherever she corners me, when we have that conversation, the same thing happens. All hell breaks loose. It took me so many tries to get out of this thing without a gunfight starting. And the reason I really wanted to avoid a gunfight is because in the massive, like, town-wide gunfight, a couple NPCs that I had been rescuing from that bank while I was also trying to gather this information, they kept getting either killed in the crossfire or like a couple Stillwater guards would like lock onto them and like make a point of killing them so the rescue wouldn't go through. But the thing is, they wouldn't run to safety. Like, you'd release them and they just stay in their cell and not run off until the shooting started, at which point they'd run into gunfire and get killed. So that was disappointing. But then the other thing I ran into was in the gunfight, as you go through towns, you see these characters with little like plus marks over them. Those are recruitable characters who you can get to join your posse, your squad.
So these are different than the friends for life that you get for doing something nice for somebody.
Yeah, the friends for life show up in fights as they get dicey, and they're like, "Hey, you remember when you rescued me from the slavers? Bam!
I heard you fucked that. You seem to have fucked this town up. I'm here to help."
And it doesn't even fully make sense. Like, you'll get like really like like, for instance, there's a really comfortable looking businessman you rescue from the Stillwaters at one point. It was in that mission that we did, Patrick. That guy who was in the cage. But like, you don't get the sense this is a hardened like killer. That guy keeps showing up randomly and being like, "I got your back, buddy." And it's like, shouldn't you be like at your office? Like, what are you doing out here? I appreciate the help, but it doesn't really make sense that you're here. But no, these characters who were recruitable, one of them is in this town that's overrun by the Stillwaters, but they're a neutral. They're not a Stillwater as far as I can tell. They're a recruitable character for your party. When the shooting starts, for whatever reason, they kept aggroing on my party, and they would they'd side up with the Stillwaters, and there'd be a shootout. Eventually, they'd be killed. Every time that happened, I would get the notification, "Major crime witnessed. You committed murder." And now all the townsfolk are after me. And it's like, okay, so now I got to kill a bunch of townsfolk, even though I'm here to like kind of help, and they're upset about this murder I committed because this guy like squatted up with the Stillwaters. It doesn't make sense, but I couldn't figure out the mechanism by which it was happening. It felt, this is kind of one of the tricks of the immersive sim, right? There are a lot of times they are built on like causal relationships and like conditions that can be set to cause characters do this, that, or the other. And when it works, you're like, wow, like the story is happening in the world. Like the characters doing what makes sense. Like it's all reflecting the gameplay and the story reflecting one another really well. When it doesn't work, and a lot of times it doesn't work really well in Weird West, it is like you are dealing with kind of a misfiring like Rube Goldberg device that's not working well.
It sounds to me like the game is filled with mechanical systems which interlock with one another, but not the kinds of narrative design that makes that actually work in a way that is satisfying or is producing stories that you were interested in telling. Because it feels like a lot of the time when you have been describing this game, it's less, let me tell you about a thing that my character did or like a particular interaction. And it's always instead been like, let me tell you about an example of this mechanic happening. And that you can so clearly see those mechanics happening, and the way that the system is interlocking feels like, to some degree, not a failure of immersive sim design, but like a sign to me that the interlocking of these systems is not actually complete. If you can look at the system and name it, I feel like that something is going wrong to some degree.
Yeah, like I think that's definitely a major part of it, where like there's gaps in the way the systems are interacting. There's things that are supposed to be bridging action reaction that just don't seem to be there. And I keep getting stuck on it, where it's like something should explain why this is happening. And it should also spark something, ideally, right? Where it's like, I realize now maybe I could have done this differently. That isn't happening. Most of the time it's like, I don't know why this is happening. It doesn't make sense in the scenario that's painted out. I don't know why this character is turning hostile, and I don't know why like the townsfolk regard, like clearly it's because the game, like once a named character, a recruitable character gets like murked in a town, that's a crime. Yeah, that seems to be what's happening. But in this case, the context should trump that, and it's not. Yeah,
I think that part of what you're describing, it sounds like there aren't enough exceptions to the rules. and the rules are functioning so mechanically that you can see, like when you're talking about, for example, this businessman showing up and helping you in all of these gunfights, right? I think that like part of strong immersive sim design is realizing that like sometimes you have to make exceptions to the mechanics to make moments that are interesting or like feel resonant in that way. Like you have to be able to mark that character as an exception, or, you know, a particular social situation where like an NPC is getting stuck on something, or like one of the rules, when the rules break, that is when these games are at their most interesting. Or, you know, you have like moments that create an opportunity for really good storytelling, is when these systems are intentionally warped by the narrative to push things in a certain direction. And it sounds like that is not happening here.
Kind of sounds like maybe this game should have been a little more like scripted and straightforward, and actually would have leaned into the things that you do like about the game, Rob. Like, I just feel like the immersive sim parts of it seem like the least interesting parts of the game so far. And I don't consider like shooting a barrel with chemicals to be like the immersive sim part. That's just, you know, like those are things just in the environment interacting with one another. Like, I just wonder if like it was just more like, hey, cute aesthetic, fun powers, neat world. You know, here's 5, right? There's like 5 different like campaign, like mini campaigns you're playing. Yeah. I've heard you can like recruit. You can then recruit the character you finished from the previous campaign into the new campaign, and they can die, which is cool. It just increasingly seems like that's the most interesting part about it. Like, yes, it is funny that, you know, the first verb the game almost gives you is a shovel that you can dig a grave for, and then like we realized the game had scripted a sequence for you to like to bury your kid in like this very fancy, nice like memorial, like a testament to their life, and then right next to it is a dog that was the family dog that was also murdered, and you just bury it right next to the corn because you hit the G button or whatever, and it's like, yeah, okay, they're buried.
No,
like,
that's a grave. Yeah.
And like that, you know, that is an element of like what we find interesting about these games, of like give people a bunch of tools and then poking and prodding at the world to see what it does. But it seems like specifically with the AI, you're finding a lot of the limitations there that I have to imagine that if I encountered that situation, my takeaway from that going forward would be, well, I'm just not, okay, I guess this is the limits of what these systems are capable of. I'm probably just going to like try and hit these story beats and like lean into the parts that I am liking rather than trying to create my own stories in the world, because it just doesn't seem like maybe the game is capable of doing that as well.
Yeah, and I also know that to the point about the shovel, there's also an awful lot of the game rewards you for checking every single searchable storage like unit in the game.
Okay,
but is that good? Is that like, do we like that? Do we like the fact that your character will be weaker because you didn't, after clearing through a bandit camp, you did not open up every single barrel because one of them has like one of the like perk cards in it or something like that?
This is also a problem I've been having with Abermore to some degree, which I can touch on in a sec. But like this is a really frustrating thing to hear about, because it's like it misunderstands what the point of like scavenging for resources is in video games, and like why that is an enjoyable process. Because when I think about a game like Stalker, for example, Stalker has a lot of resource scavenging. You have to pick over bodies at the end of a fight. Picking over bodies at the end of the fight where there's like 4 or 5 enemies, it's different from like moving through a place with like 20 fucking barrels and checking in every barrel just in fucking case. And it makes up for that barrel checking process by giving you hints at where things are. You could check behind every corner and it's going to take you fucking forever. Or you could pick up the PDA on that particular body and see that someone has a note that they left their backpack in this part of the compound. Then you go there and you find it, right? That is the story, is you stumbling upon little bits of information that then point you and encourage that exploration, as opposed to exploring exploration by just giving you a bunch of shit to rifle through and being like, well, we're incentivizing you to rifle through the shit, so that's exploration, right?
Yeah, and a lot of games have run up against that. And I think something that the PDA thing, highlighting where good loot is one way, like you can sort of speed up the like, look, the real valuables are here. And this is something that I think Dishonored and Prey were actually pretty good at, where it's like they let you know that like, hey, behind this locked door is some really good stuff.
Da-dum. Like, it's like, okay, you want to go in this, like, look, if you don't want to actually exhaust everything, like here are the relics in the environment. Mm-hmm. these are like sub-objectives that are going to guide you. And then you'll do the looting along the way, and the game will then, like, you'll have that extra slack in terms of like inventory and resources that naturally come from moving from a place from A to B. But it sounds like a lot of what's happening here is like, no, what's actually fun is like hitting, search on every object in the environment and then realizing, oh shit, they're like meaningful character upgrades just locked behind a random barrel is bad. Like that's not the way that those systems should work.
And the other thing is, like, I think Dishonored was really good at in the course of exploration. The environments were so dense with like well sketched moments or little bits of like world building information that usually you felt rewarded even for the scut work of going through every single room in the servants' quarters of a mansion or something. Like, you still found stuff there that was like meaningful and added to the world. I don't think Weird West has some like notes you'll find and such, but none of it sort of sells the world or makes a moment the way some of its predecessors did. And so I think it ends up working against itself in that way too, where it's like, you are incentivized to do a lot of really boring things in this game in between the moments of action, which is a bummer. But like it sort of goes to show that even with a studio that seems to has the pedigree, knows what it's doing in the genre, like these games are harder to make than maybe it appears, right? Like like I can see how you end up thinking immersive sims can be so dense with like a location and can create so many like stories and moments in a given location. It's easy to think like, wow, that's kind of the secret to via these mechanics they can imbue a space or setting with a ton more possibilities than necessarily you would have just creating a linear like critical path through an area. That's a good pitch. It's harder than it appears to be. Ren, I feel like you're running up against that a bit with Abermore.
So yeah, Abermore is if we've been using Dishonored as a comparison point, Abermore also fits into that vein. Abermore is obviously deeply inspired by Thief and Dishonored. Abermore is a first-person stealth action game that takes place over the course of 18 days. The game's basic pitch is that you are a person who has come into contact with an individual known as the Unhanged Man, who has magical powers given to them by Lady Luck. And they then pass those powers on to you after being discovered by the king. You then take on the role of the Unhanged Man and spend 18 days prepping for the biggest heist of the century. It's a really cool pitch. Those 18 days are spent doing 18 smaller heists, each of which is basically getting you more and more prepared, getting you more kitted out, and expanding your abilities, and also building contacts, because you need people to help you with this heist in 18 days. And if you don't have people help you, you are not going to be able to pull this off. You need good co-conspirators. And so basically the game is the process of trying to assemble these co-conspirators by doing favors for people and acquiring materials over the course of these weeks, right? It has a Dishonored-style power system based on tarot cards, which personally I fucking love. I'm a big like fan of tarot cards, both as like a way of creating meaning in one's life, but also as a like aesthetic marker. I absolutely fucking adore them. And each tarot card basically gives your character a different Dishonored style power. And part of the cool thing mechanically is that you can only hold 3 at a time. And so you basically have to go into each level kitting yourself out and being like, okay, which 3 powers that I can each use one time do I want to use to navigate this particular space? And it's actually very well put together in that regard. There's your invisibility power, there's a blink style power, there is an ability that just turns enemies to stone, there's an ability that lets you instantly unlock any kind of door, et cetera, that are all really neat and like fun to use, especially in conjunction with one another. However, these heists are marred by a ton of level design and technical issues that cannot be overstated. So for example, when you are like going through a stairwell, something happens with the game's geometry where you can often see when you're attempting one of these heists where you're breaking into a building, climbing on top of things. The climbing is very like mechanical in a way that is very satisfying. Where Dishonored, you can like fall off of something or like jump wrong and not be able to like grab something correctly. In Abermore, you just look at a ledge and press a button and your character reaches for that specific ledge. And so you can be a lot more precise with your movement through a space, right? But you can going through a stairwell, and then because of a geometry glitch, you can see through the floor of the floor that you're about to go to. And so you can see where every single servant or guard is placed in that entire area, because they're just like, you can see them through the floor. You can see where every item is. You can see where all of the power boxes is that you have to disassemble to like turn off traps. And a lot of the like exploration is undercut by this tech issue. And if it was just this one thing, I would say that like, they can patch it out. The game will be in a lot better state afterwards. But there are also problems with fundamental level design and walking into a space. And so you're playing an immersive sim. You see a vent, right? What do you do?
Crawl in that shit.
You're going to crawl in that shit. Damn right you will, Patrick. So
maybe turn into some mist and I'll just like go through it, not even open it, make no noise. Like, let's go.
That's an interesting option. Well, I lockpicked my way in because, boy, this game has a lot of lockpicking. And its lockpicking minigame is it's a fine lockpicking minigame. It's totally acceptable.
But it's a lot of lockpicking minigame.
Yeah, it's pretty close. It's also like, not to talk about the mechanics of lockpicking for a second, it's actually like a pretty good way to do a lockpicking minigame where you're basically, there's like a bar that fills up and you're trying to get to a specific point by making the bar go like, so you're like, oh, I'm going to make it go a quarter of the way this time and like a third of the way this time. So I'm avoiding all of the things that would like jam the lock. It's basically setting pins. It is actually doing like a pretty good job of like getting across the way that you actually lockpick by like setting pins in place and then like moving deeper in. Once you set the pins, then getting the turn. It's cute. But boy, is there a fucking lot of it. And boy, do you have to craft a lot of lockpicks. So you lockpick your way into a vent, Patrick. Well, guess what? The second level of the vent also is locked. So you lockpick your way through the second part of the vent, and you get into this shaft that is basically like it's the home's internal like ventilation system. And you're in there, and you jump down to the next level below. And then you open up your inventory, and you do not have enough lockpicks to get through the two vents in front of you. And you're like, well, I'll just climb out. No.
Are they
you
locked
have
again?
Dropped through yes. Oh yeah. No. You've dropped through a floor.
I thought you were gonna leave and then have to like pick the locks.
No, it's worse. Because of a map glitch, the floor doesn't have a way to get back up to the previous level.
Great.
So you are stuck in this little hole with vents that you can't lockpick your way through, no way to get new lockpicks, and no movement tools to exit the situation. So you just close the video game and reload your save.
I do want this game rang a bell for me because I had marked it as a game that I might want to write about, not because I had played it, but because of a series of tweets by its game director, Dan Pierce. And so there's I'll link it in here so
please,
all of you can look at it. But I will just read it out. If you click through, you'll see a couple extra ones. But this comes from Dan Pierce. Abermore is out today. You might have noticed I've not really spoken about it much since it was announced. I'm proud of what we did with the resources we had, but it was also a very difficult project for us. I hope you'll be understanding if that makes it hard to talk about. One thing I do feel the need to be open about is that out of necessity, the same week the game was announced, most of us started other jobs. This means we will not be able to support the game the way we think it deserves. I'm proud of everyone who developed the game. I do think it's sincerely interesting, weird, original little thing, and I hope some of it comes through. If you want to check it out, then I think you should. But I thought that was like an interesting way to talk about a game that you've just released, acknowledging that it's deeply flawed and like acknowledging here like the technical issues that you're having, they exist. Will they be fixed? It really sounds like probably not. And I thought it was a fascinating way for a developer to frame, here's this thing we worked on, we're proud of what we the bits that we're proud of. Like, we're also probably proud of the bits that didn't work out as well. It's here, like, it's just unusual for a developer to talk about something they've just hit publish on in this way that I found was refreshing. Probably not great for their sales, but was nonetheless like a really interesting way to talk about like a creative endeavor as you reach what kind of seems like the end state, as opposed to how a lot of games are developed these days, where in many ways you may not be early access, but you can expect that there will be polishing and tweaking and updates done that weren't able to get finished before the game was like quote unquote done, or in response to what players encounter once it's out in the world. And so given that, like, as soon as you mentioned that one detail about the floor, I was like, oh, maybe this is the time to talk about these tweets, because like all I've been able to do is to think about them ever since you started discussing the technical issues.
So, and I think that like this game has to be especially difficult to deal with, and you know the phrasing here, it was a difficult project for us. I think that's completely understandable because of the like incredible difficulty of immersive sim design. There is a quote from, I believe it's Warren Spector, about the original Deus Ex, where he's talking about what state the original Deus Ex was in 2 months before release. 2 months before the release of the original Deus Ex, they had family members and friends come in and play the game. And all of those people looked at them and said, "This is bad. This is not good. This is not working." And then in those 2 months, they tweaked a handful of systems, and suddenly the immersive sim thing clicked. They restructured the narrative of the game. They like changed the order of the levels, and they changed a couple of systems, and like that, it clicked into a classic, because immersive sim design is so complicated and so multi-layered that basically you don't know what you have until it's all together. You don't know if the systems are going to talk to each other properly until they are all talking to each other all of the time. And so when I look at something like Abermore with the knowledge that like basically the people who were working on it were moving into these other projects as the game comes out, it becomes a really interesting example of this fact, where every time I play it, I'm like, this game is so close to working so well and being so interesting. And it is interesting regardless of whether or not all of the technical issues are ever solved. It is an interesting artifact nonetheless, because it is doing such a good job of exemplifying the ways in which immersive sim design, and why a lot of devs don't do immersive sims and the genre died out for a little bit there, is because it's fucking hard. And it is a mode of production that is, from what I understand, there's actually a really good H-Bomber Guy video talking about the production of Deus Ex Human Revolution and like the final state of that game, that actually makes the argument that like the modern structure of game design companies make immersive sims really fucking difficult to make, because immersive sims require a lot of pivoting to make them work late in the project, and that is not what the industry is built for right now. In a lot of very key ways, because the amount of money in these productions means that it's very hard to let things go and restructure things late in a project. And so Abermore comes to this like very, very odd and like not disappointing place. I mean, it's disappointing insofar as like you can see the echoes of something so much more interesting. Not more interesting. The interesting thing is here, something so much more complete. Very rarely do you see a game that you know is never going to be finished, published with a price tag, with strong designers behind it, and so clearly full of fundamentals. And now knowing, because I did not see these tweets before I was picking up and playing through the game and was like doing like research, I'm sure I would have stumbled on these while researching the piece that I'm writing about the game. And like, this is a huge bummer, but also like a historically interesting one.
Mm-hmm. That's why I found that's exactly the same reason why I thought about writing about it. It was just like, like these are usually what you get at like a GDC postmortem, or like, hey, can we talk about this game I made a year ago? Not that level of honesty, at least as long as you're not cynical about it and take it at face value. Like I thought was kind of fascinating.
I'm always left kind of wondering too, what's the story behind like knowing that this thing's kind of stillborn? This like, is it difficult project because like the publisher wasn't supportive in the right way? Difficult project because just at a certain point everyone's realizing that like it will not be worth the effort it will take to like get this thing into proper shape.
This is another 18 months and no one has that.
And it's not going to pay for it. It will never it won't earn back further investment at this point. I'm always like, I'm so curious about like what results in a project like this where the designers are kind of like, you know, it's, we did some really good stuff here and maybe you'll get something out of it, but we're done with it. And we know it has those issues. We will probably not be fixing most of them.
Yeah,
I was curious what
the note in this tweet. Yeah. Oh, sorry, please.
No, I'm just always so curious what like gets someone to that point. Like as a game.
The story behind the story is like has to be fascinating.
The note being the second tweet in the thread just says, one thing I do feel the need to be open about is out of necessity, the same week the game was announced, most of us started other jobs. And it sounds like basically they just did not have the ability to develop the resources to like distribute the resources that they needed to develop something like this, which it's tough.
Yeah.
Kata, you were saying?
No, that's what I was going to point out. It's kind of wild to think of starting development on a thing and then also having to immediately do other work in that way. Like a game development is already such a time-consuming thing. Like splitting your time between two projects feels like one of them is going to get hurt. Like ultimately, and it's like, was it just like wasn't a good publisher deal in the works to like support them to like fully focus on one project? Like how do you end up in that specific situation?
So I actually think we may be conflating. Like this game was announced right before it came out. So this game was announced.
Okay, yes, that's the thing that's confusing me. Yes, did
right.
you mean
and
like?
So I wanted to like. I think we're talking about like. I think it's easy to look at those tweets and be like, oh, when this game was announced, in the way that most games are announced, was like, oh, 3 years ago.
Right. They've been moonlighting for 2 years around building this game.
No,
instead
this
was like
this game was announced on February 14th.
Yes.
Okay. And the tweet here is, pull off the ultimate royal heist, yada yada. It's coming out PC on March 29th. And so I think a period in which there would be like you'd imagine like intense polish, getting this game over the finish, like trying to get into like a more polished state.
Right.
Like, they announce it, and it sounds like it's announced because like this is what we got, and it's coming. Right. It's coming out in a month and a half, and we've all started new jobs. And if Ren, you just did this, right? Like when you start a new thing, you've got a lot of other things you're dealing with as a part of that, like onboarding, and the idea that you'd also be finishing and polishing a video game to be released in 2022 is, it makes it all of it make a little more sense, and I think that only underscores Rob's interest and like what led them to the point where almost it sounds like the game was forced to be announced because this is it. Like there was a meeting. Right. It's like, this is it. Like now everyone needs to.
When do you call
families?
It
on a
sounds,
game? Yeah.
This is actually part of the thing Patrick, you're actually talking about the timeline here. The timeline perfectly fits with what has been said previously about, what Spectres, for example, said about immersive sim game design. The game didn't work 2 months before release. And like this announced, and then 2 months later or a month and a half later came out. And yeah, that foundational polish work that makes games like this actually function as systems interlocking did not get done. Rob, it looked like you had something.
No, I love the top reply here though. After these really open and clear tweets from Dan. But will you be fixing anything with the game, or will it remain a buggy mess? I wish you all the best for your future projects, but you can't leave stuff half cooked. Oh yes, they can.
There's also like,
would you like to make a threat?
Yeah.
There is I'd actually like to address one more of these tweets where people are like, this should never have been allowed to be released in this state, quote unquote. Yes, it should have. Like, that's the thing, is that like part of this has to do with like the ways in which game design is talked about and the way in which like it is a completely mystified profession, and like game development is often like heavily mystified for outsiders. Is that like fucking obviously this game is inches away from being fucking phenomenal, but you cannot see any of that because of the actual structure of the like how these things are made, and it's just
also like the inches can be a mile long, right?
Exactly.
And that's probably the case here. And like I understand people's fundamental. A lot of games like this would come out in early access and then smooth that stuff out over the course of a year, and that's like a way that developers, also finance the things. Like, hey, can you basically let's release it, front some of the money so we can keep doing this, release it in early access. But obviously, like there was a different consideration. And I think the industry, the fact that they were honest about it, it's not on the main Twitter feed, but like, it's not like you got to dig very far to find all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have to say that, right? And so it's like the fact that someone would like throw that back in their face after being like more transparent than you are even owed. In terms of like what's out here. I mean, Steam already has a refund policy. Like you can download it, fucking hate it, and get your money back like immediately, like without question. And so the notion that you're complaining about that on a platform that is the most generous in terms of like allowing people to essentially have a demo of any game is just sort of silly. But it's why designers don't do this. Like, why do developers not talk about this part? Because then people throw it in their face if they're honest. And so what is the reward for being honest other than just for the sake of it?
Yeah, and also like I don't know. It's really frustrating. This additional information is so deeply frustrating to like have to then carry the weight of the public's response to what is effectively a project that was stillborn, but also a ton of people did a lot of work on and has made something super fucking interesting. And that like all of that work is still 100% worthy of being treated as labor and as being treated as worthwhile. Like the idea that like you can make 95% of an incredible game, and just because you don't have that last 5%, it means that the thing you've done is worthless is fucking
it means you then go to their Steam page and it's like, you see there's like these really honest, earnest tweets about like the difficulties of making a game. And then it's like 26 reviews, mostly negative. And then it's just like like the systems by which we use to judge the qualities of games. I mean, I understand the usefulness of all that stuff, but it's a bummer, like especially for what you're saying, right? Where it's like it seems to it dilutes the usefulness of this exercise as an exercise down to 26 largely negative reviews.
Though it's interesting how many of these negative reviews are still like, man, there's something like it's so close.
I know,
it's frustrating. I can't hate to say it, but you shouldn't buy it.
Yeah, and like that's
there was one that like really made me laugh. So this comes from their name on Steam is Unskilled Trash. I don't know if this is just how they start all their reviews or not, but 0.7, they put about 0.7 hours into the game, not recommended. The review starts with trash, and it says Abermore is a thieving game that just effectively stole my patience. Pros: good idea. Cons: not ready for release.
Beautiful.
I think that I think when I play this game and when I think about writing about this game, I think a lot about the piece released by Harper J before they left Kotaku called Games Criticism as a Kindness, and the ways in which the critical lens, when applied to texts, right, can kind of divorce them from audience expectation and kind of look at them from a systems perspective. From like a critic's lens, if I look at the video game Abermore, and I look at how the systems interact, and I look at how everything clicks together, and I look at that tarot card system where you only get 3 powers and you're switching them on the fly over the course of a run and like altering your deck. When I look at all of the systems of this game and the way that you can see the ghost of them clicking together, I cannot help but see something beautiful here. And the fact that that is like obscured by technical issues and by a culture around games that prioritizes polish over anything else is a huge bummer. And I like wish that there was more. And by wish that there was more, I think that like it is our job as people who talk about video games for a living to talk about games like Weird West and to talk about games like Abermore, who are at their core the ghost of something great. And that the work that has been done to make them that way is like worthwhile and important and genuine and like has created something that even if it is not resonating for like the consumer TM is worth appraisal and consideration as something really special and interesting. And I think that in the glimmers of these Steam reviews that are like, this game is great, but you shouldn't buy it, I am hopeful that attitude will continue to persist until it gets to the point where people are going, this game isn't great, but it's so cool that you should buy it, as like a larger cultural standpoint of like where games are less products to derive, the correct amount of joy from, and more things to be dissected and looked at and engaged with, like on their own terms. And so if there's any hope I have for Abermore and people's response to it outside of these shitty fucking Twitter comments, it is people's willingness to look at something interesting and go, fuck, that was really cool. And my hope for critics to do that same work.
All right. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with the second half of the show. And we're back. Patrick, so the other extreme of video games in some ways, that symbol of everything the industry once aspired to be, and what its view of itself and the type of experiences it wanted to create. E3 was kind of that trade show, and it appears to be no more. What's the state of E3? Is it undead? Is it entombed forever?
Well, so the timeline of the last couple of years, COVID happens, March 2020. At least that's kind of how sort of like began playing out for much of us in March 2020. And around that time is when a bunch of conventions started realizing that maybe things were going to be different. Like GDC was the first one that we saw, PAX East. Those hit that March-April timeframe, and E3 really put off canceling their physical in-person showcase, and eventually did not really have a digital product ready to go. There was a thing that happened that year. Last year they did a fully digital thing after wanting to do a physical thing. We're backed into it again. At that point, Jeff Keighley's summer showcase things were kind of in full swing. And then this year, preemptively, despite early announcing that they were going to do a physical digital hybrid event, they just got ahead of it and said that they were just not doing anything entirely. They tried to put this caveat that the organizers at the ESA, that we're canceling this year so we can be ready to go next year, which just sounds like a way for some people to keep their jobs before they cancel it next year. And so it's E3, that's this long running trade show, which was a byproduct of CES from the 90s, which was a technology show out of Las Vegas. E3 used to be called the Electronic Entertainment Expo. It's called E3 with none of those acronyms anymore, but it's just kept it because that's been the branding for 20 plus years. E3 used to be, the reason E3 existed was because video games weren't taken seriously despite being popular, and all the game companies wanted to be under one roof in order to sort of centralize mainstream coverage of the industry as an industry. It started as a retail event and then became sort of a retail marketing hybrid thing over time. And then where we're at now is a bunch of publishers realizing they have individual power. They don't need to be under the E3 branding. It's a confluence of Nintendo Directs, Jeff Keighley, a move from physical to digital in terms of just how people buy things. But it ends in a place where rather than E3 getting some sort of grand send off, if one was even possible, or even a send off that felt like it was being done with some sort of honor or dignity, that this is the end of the road. Instead, it just goes out with a weird whimper of a press release that just reeks of desperation. I also can't help but feel, I wrote a piece on this on the site that went up last Friday. E3 is the event that kind of gave me a career, because that's the place you went to. If you could go there, you could get a career, or you could try and carve something out in the industry. That has not been the case for many, many, many years. I think that also explains its kind of mythological status within like even as fans talk about how E3 is disappointing year after year, the reason they gear up for it is because of that mythology that's been built around what E3 used to be and how important it was both to the industry and people who got to attend it. And we're on the other end of that now.
I mean, it's also kind of, I was thinking about like things that made E3, and part of it is also just that like there used to be so many projects in the games industry of dubious, as now, of dubious merit, right? Or of dubious seriousness. But like, the industry was served well by having sort of a massive, like big tent, like trade show, in part because there were the things that were like reliable draws, but also there's so many publishers, including major ones, that had different projects they were trying to get eyes on. You know what I mean? It was very much a show that was very much like here are all our wares. And the people showing their wares would be major players who you did know, and they still saw a lot of value in trying to break through that way. And then there were a lot of like smaller players who desperately needed the exposure provided by like
all the big players being there. I mean, like some of the most famous examples over the years of that are a Guitar Hero, which was a game made in conjunction with the peripheral manufacturer Red Octane. They did not have the original Guitar Hero prototype, did not have a presence on the main show floor. It was in a place called Kensha Hall, which I'm sure you've heard plenty of jokes about if you have listened to probably specifically things like the Bombcast over the years. Like you went to Kensha Hall, that was where like a lot of like Asian peripheral makers like that. Where the retail part of E3 continued on was in the lower levels in Kensha Hall, where you'd go down there and be like, wow, I didn't know you could make controllers out of this. And like that's made Kensha Hall like a very interesting curiosity. Eventually, Kensha Hall was paved over and became a parking lot for
Kentia Garage.
Like became a garage at some point. But I specifically remember the E3 where the Guitar Hero prototype was like nobody had booked appointments for it. It was like a handful of people did it because they knew someone and like, oh, come check out this cool thing. And by the last day of E3, you had colleagues of yours telling you, see if you can head down there and go to talk to the desk to see if you can sneak in to like go see this game that like everyone is losing their minds over. And so you had this giant marketing event in which word of mouth was how interest of it was being spread like very organically and virally in the early days of internet-based video game coverage. Different versions of that even prior, around the same time, would be like, I remember one of the fun things would be like you'd go to a booth and there would just be, you know, some game you've never heard of, had never gotten any sort of announcement. And it's just there, playable. Developers maybe are there, maybe aren't there. I remember like the original Katamari was a game just tucked away in Namco's booth. And like I remember various people telling me, there's this game with this ball and you roll it. It's okay. It like just go play it. It's like one of the coolest things I've seen. And it's one kiosk for one game that like you're not even reliably sure if it's coming out in America. And there it is, and like became like its ability to have an audience, gain traction, get fully localized is because, well, I don't know, GameSpot goes over and like puts a sticker on the booth that says, you know, a best of show, yada, yada, yada. And like that's a lot of what that show functioned on as from like a marketing standpoint before we had the ability to, you know, you could be, you know, even, you know, like an Abermore where like you can have a Twitter account and you can talk about what you're working on. Like, how did you get the word out on a game of that scale back then? Well, you hope you got noticed at an E3 booth and that GameSpot, you know, did something about you.
Like, I guess for me, the thing that I know that E3, like, I understand there's a lot of different reasons to be nostalgic for a thing like this, but I guess in some ways it feels like the slow death of E3 has also indicated the degree to which like you just have so many. We've talked about this before, but like there's so many fewer mid-sized publishers now. It feels like actually indie publishers are starting to step up increasingly in that role of like creating games at that scale.
There are fewer THQs, but there are more Devolver, humble, like folks who are like are getting bigger through like sheer mass of like smaller things they're involved. Even Devolver is almost like we think of it as an indie outfit, but like they published like Fall Guys, like made a lot of, you know what I mean? Like even like our sense of what is indie, or like what the scale of that has radically transformed and is like difficult to articulate sometimes.
Right. And so I think in some ways, like what I find it very easy to be nostalgic about when I think of these trade shows was that idea of like, you might just turn a corner and see something really weird and cool that just flown completely under the radar, that possibility of discovery. And I think what has been kind of dismaying might be the wrong word, but all the major publishers realize they can just do their own direct marketing and they don't need a trade show like this. And they're not even making enough projects that they have to worry about like any sort of breaking through with marketing, because they're not creating that many games anymore. But they all, even then, like as E3 was dying, they all still kind of understood the value of like a center point for media attention. Like frankly, I've always thought what EA did, which is doing its own show like same week of across town, was kind of like bullshit, right? Like it was a really, like, you're still part of E3. You were
they just didn't want to pay the dues. They came like it was a financial decision. It was like they didn't want, like, there's certain, like, to participate in E3 required a financial commitment, which is why publishers like Activision, EA started pulling out, but still doing things around E3 because they still recognize the gravity pull of the event. And if in the same way that, for a long time, game companies still wanted to do their reveals on like a Game Informer cover, not because it was the best way to get your game noticed, but because they were just nostalgic for like, that's just what we've always done. And like E3 had a combination of that, or like a gravitational pull, but also just, well, that's how we've always done things here. And so, yeah, like, but it was ultimately like a financial decision because they just didn't want to pay to like pre-secure a booth before they knew what was going on, in addition to other points.
Right. And so I think a lot of like smaller projects end up with that, familiar problem of discoverability, but also the fact that in a lot of cases, what's supplanted, playing the E3 lottery or the trade show lottery is in some ways like playing the YouTuber lottery. With even longer odds, maybe, of like, hope this blows up and somehow becomes like a viral trend in the space, or you're playing the lottery of maybe this will be the one that starts getting buzz in like media circles that will start getting attention. But in the meantime, we're all working with the same 20 PR firms that generate 1,000 pitches a day, and so even there, like it's not like even the communications channels that a lot of developers still have that have supplanted things like this really work that well. So like I get nostalgic for E3 because like I miss the idea, at least, of like it was such a chance to see so many things you might not otherwise tune into. But if it's physically there in front of you, sure, I'll play this demo, and maybe it would be fucking awesome. Maybe it would be a promising beginning, and then you would realize, like, oh wait, they released that 2 months later. I thought that was like an alpha. Oh shit, okay. But I enjoyed both those experiences.
Yeah, and like most of my nostalgia is born less out of what the event is or even what it was, and more just my own personal history, because like that was just my entryway to the industry itself, which is just not the way that most folks come through anymore, because it's not relevant to that degree. But it was for me at that age, where it's just like, okay, well, if you show up here, you're going to meet the right people. You meet these right people, like doors will open for you later. And that was definitely which one did you go to first, Rob?
Oh gosh,
because I was E3
a
98 in Atlanta, but I'm an outlier, being a 14-year-old weirdo that managed to convince their parents to go there with them.
Yeah, no, I think my first E3 might have been like a year or two before before the reveal of the Xbox One and the PS4.
Okay.
So like whatever that was, like 2 years before that, I think I started going to E3.
Okay. Yeah.
I will say I was shocked how grueling it was. I was like, oh shit, it's like endless. The amount of like walking and like playing.
Yeah, I think about the amount of work I used to do at the show relative to like where I ended up. In many ways, like the ways we operated things like Waypoint were a direct response to not wanting to like just spend all day at an E3 and then go write 6 500 word previews and then also go to dinner and then like also go out networking until 1 a.m. and then you get up and just do the whole thing all over again. Not great. Instead, just podcast for 7 hours straight. That's better.
Yeah.
Learned no lessons, actually. Just turned it into my... But you know what? It is so much easier to bullshit into a microphone than it is to bullshit 500 words multiple times over about a game that you don't really want to talk about. Like those are
100% true.
Those are so much like, yes, it may sound like the joke here is like, you just like transferred it to a different medium. I did. I transferred it to a much easier medium to bullshit.
And a medium where it makes sense too. Like,
yes,
I think the self-contained like 500 words on a game that you're like,
the GameSpot IGN model
like,
of like, we need to cover everything that's here and have words associated with it in a pre-SEO era where it's not even you're doing that to blanket a search engine. You're just doing it because we're an index of everything that's happening, and that's how we maximize people coming to our website. I think we're like did like previews of like Sims expansion packs. Like, what am I doing that for? Because that's what whatever web GameSpy would pay me to do if I went there.
I once went to a 1C event where I had to write up a thing on every single thing coming out in the 1C catalog. And you know, with anything about 1C, you know that ranged a fucking, like, it was a wide fucking gamut of projects. And so it was like games you knew would never like come out. It was games that were just look terrible, but each one of them, it's like, okay, here's another intro about like what's the quick pitch for this. Just absolutely like intellectually exhausting work, because it's like, I can't think of a reason why you'd be interested in this. Like,
I'm basically just rewriting press releases and adding like 100 words of my own observations, which really are just observations over a prepackaged demo, which might as well be a press release. Oh no, I've wasted so much time doing this in my career.
My life. Patrick, before we move on though, what have you been playing lately? In addition to like having E3 feelings as it goes under, what have you been into in terms of like stuff you're actually playing?
Two kind of quick things. One, I beat Ghostwire Tokyo. I don't have a great explanation for it. Other than
wait, what? What do you mean you don't need? You need a great explanation for beating Ghostwire Tokyo?
Yeah, because I don't think it's very good. It's like a 6 out of 10. But I can't even sit here and fully articulate it. But I'm sure like all of us have certain games that, I don't know, like you just have a draw towards, like you know it's not the best use of your time, but I don't know. Like I found enough of the world and gameplay compelling, even as I tell myself, this is pretty not good. This could have been done a lot better. One thing I didn't do in Ghostwire Tokyo is I managed to find upgrades that compensated for deficiencies in like the base design, which like for one of those is that exploring the world is very slow. And the game has verticality, but exploring that verticality is a huge pain in the ass. But if you spend like 2 hours grinding skill points to like be able to dump that into this upgrade that the game really doesn't want to give you unless you're like, Dan, do you really want this power? And I was like, yes, I do. And that power is in the game. There are these yokai, these ghosts scattered up on the tops of buildings. And if you look at them, you can grapple to them. And this one power says, what if you could just summon those at will and just have them yourself? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Because what it meant was that I could get up to buildings, navigate to and from buildings from after being very high up. It just made exploring the Tokyo they'd set up like much more interesting. And it's like, this should have just been in the game from the start as like a cooldown. The other is like a lot of what you're doing in this game is after you defeat certain enemies or do certain objectives or like ghosts that you kind of like, I forget the exact like terminology, but like, there's the belief that like there are certain types of paper that can be imbued with a spirit. And like you have those pieces of paper in Ghostwire Tokyo that you can then like turn in to return these spirits that have been captured by the bad guy in the game. That becomes experience points. But like it takes like 3-4 seconds for you to like go through the cycle of like sucking those ghosts into the paper. And one of the upgrades is, would you like that to go faster? Which is almost like the game acknowledging we've artificially made this slow to annoy the fuck out of you.
Yeah.
Would you like to spend precious skill points making that instantaneous? And I said, yes. And so once I kind of did all these things, I managed to get the game to a place that, like, I wish the base level version of this game was closer to this. Like, it's a game that I wanted to be faster. It's a game that I wanted to have a little more dynamic elements to the combat and movement. And it doesn't fully get there, but I got it to a place where then I can enjoy the story for what it was. And I actually think by the end, like, it has a pretty interesting story about, like, death and, you know, what does it mean to say, like, how do we sort of, like, grieve and think about people in the afterlife. And, like, I found it, like, kind of charming and interesting. It was just like, I had to do a lot of work to shape the game to get there, which is bad. But if this game ever showed up, like, on a Game Pass, it would be, like, perfect for that sort of thing. But as it stands, it was more kind of like what Ren was saying earlier. I think there is joy in playing mediocre games to understand why they are mediocre and, like, how a game arrives at that. That doesn't mean that normal people should spend 12 hours discovering. But I think especially as, like, critics and, like, writers, like, it is worth going through the process of playing games that are fundamentally flawed and being able to articulate, like, why they do or don't work. And I found, like, Ghostwire Tokyo, for a studio that I quite like what they're doing, to be, like, worthy of that endeavor. So yeah, the recommendation comes with some caveats, but I still found the experience to be pretty enjoyable. And then now that I speak of it, I was going to talk about the end of Tunic, but, like, I'm so close to the end, I'll just wait and we'll do it on Thursday. But I have some issues with the end of what otherwise is probably one of my favorite games of the year. But Tunic remains extremely good. But we'll check in later when I actually see the end.
I feel like this thing that you're describing that Ghostwire did is one of my biggest pet peeves in, like, games these days. Is, like, where you can see they designed something really fun and then through whatever decisions chopped it down, and it's like, this could have been a great game from the beginning, but progression or whatever decision made you make it feel worse at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like, the ghost sucky thing, like, being one of those, is just like, come on, man. Like
this
you purposely made your game worse. Like, this isn't gating. It's not a skill check or, like, hey, we want the player to spend this amount of time using these powers before they spoke in a different direction. It's like, no, like, look, should these ghosts be sucked up instantaneously with, like, one button press?
Yeah.
Yes, there should be no waiting involved. But, like, what if by the end of the game, you've spent probably close to an hour watching a bar fill, putting these ghosts on this paper? Like, it's just deeply frustrating. I mean, you read enough about that project, it sounds like it was pretty troubled and actually had a lot of difficulties. It was largely what the production was during COVID, and it seems like that had a profound impact on the design, you know. And it's too bad because you in the same way that the Evil Within, I don't think that game's very good. Do I think the Evil Within 2, like, learns hard lessons from that and then is one of the most interesting survival horror games of the last 10 years? Abso-fucking-lutely. Unfortunately, I don't think Ghostwire Tokyo will probably do well enough to, like, get that sequel. I hope. I would love to play a second one of these because I think there's enough here they could do something really special a second time around. But, you know, at the end of the day, you should just play Evil Within 2. Like, if I just get 10 more people to play that game.
Look, just make it a 101 and then we all have to play it.
Well, Rob played a decent chunk of that game.
That's true.
Well,
that's true.
Yeah. You drink a lot of coffee in that game. That's how you get your health back at the checkpoints.
Loved it.
It's great.
That
Is
game's
1
awesome.
or 2 the one where you get the goop?
The goop?
Yeah, there's like a pickup. There's like a, I forget what it was. You were slurping goop at some point during a stream. I'm trying to remember which one of those it was. It was.
I don't know if I streamed Evil Within 2. Did I?
This is where we remember, like, COD was just invented.
No,
like, just
there's a
memory COD was
fucking.
invented.
We have an
That's true, we're
emote
just
in the
slurping
Discord
goop.
that is the goop, and I'm pretty sure it's about Evil Within.
Oh, you might be right about that. I don't think I streamed a ton of it, though.
No, I think it was like one or
Yeah.
two maybe streams, but
Yeah. Good game.
goop.
Boop.
All right. Well, before we go, we can. Okay, real quick though. Look, weird, kind of not like universally recommendable games. They're not like normal people can enjoy those too. If you're a normal person, maybe you're a normal person who, like, you know, got normal taste, but like you just want to feel something. you want to play a game that's like a little weird and you can like scrape your brain against it in interesting ways.
Joker, what's happening?
It's getting a little twisted. What if gaming was a little twisted?
Do you want to welcome to my mind palace. My name's Rob
I feel like a
Zachney.
little bit shitty about playing a game,
welcome
but
to my
intellectually stimulated by the potential of what it could have been.
welcome to my
that's fine.
fucked up
That's
little
fine.
world. It's me, Rob Zachney. Welcome to my palace of strange devices.
Well, hold on. I'm just saying you do not need to be a critic to be like, you know what? I will try Abermore. I know my eyes are open to what I'm getting into. There are tons of people who are like, you know what I love? Straymon Studio games. I don't know why anyone like, yeah, exactly. I think they're bad games.
Price.
Well, I think
Renata Price.
I think I
is the
Divine
name of
Cybermancy
this
is
person.
bad, but I understand people love it, and like
you think Cybermancy is bad?
I hate it.
That's fine.
But the thing is, like, but I can also say, but it's also really interesting. Like, I didn't enjoy playing it, but it's like, wow, there's a lot of ideas being chucked haphazardly into
I
this
want to be
thing.
clear. I don't even know that Ghostwire Tokyo is hitting what you are describing here. I think Abermore is, right? I think Abermore is like operating at a higher level of interesting, and you're dragging yourself across some of like the polished nails, like to get there. I don't know that Ghostwire Tokyo is quite that. This was more of like
the polished nails.
we've all have our profoundly mediocre experiences that we don't want to justify, but we do them anyway. Like, I don't come out the end of Ghostwire Tokyo being like, I've been intellectually enlightened by this experience. I was like, nah, it was fine. If it was anything, I don't know, it's like watching some Netflix show, like, that's not very good. But even that's like good trash. That's not what this is. I don't know. I just got to the end of it, and I had to explain it and justify it on a podcast for 10 minutes, and I think that's different than Abermore. I think Abermore, like, there's more to talk about in that game than in Ghostwire Tokyo.
I will note that there is actually a very excellent Jacob Geller video about this exact situation, about like the utility of writing. And like, I think the interesting, Patrick, is like what you were saying about Ghostwire, that you left it without anything and you're like, that is like for so many people, that is most games they interact with, or a lot of games they interact with. And like the function, even if Ghostwire was not that game for you, there is such a real possibility that in like a month or whatever, someone will release a piece that will reshape your idea of that game in your head, and it will get stuck in your fucking craw, even if your initial experience was dog shit or deeply mediocre. And like,
yeah,
that
I don't have the language to
utility of,
explain. Like, there is clearly something that got me. Like, I don't have that much time, right? And so I still, like, I put aside Elden Ring. Like, I went and I finished this game off, and part of it is I like finishing things that I start. Like, once I start, like, I do like to see it to the end, and that is like it's a problem. Like, I have to like tell myself to put things down, like that it's okay to not finish them. But that's not what happened here. And so like, I am waiting for that piece to like, I just couldn't do it. I can't articulate it. It's not there. Hopefully someone else could do it for me that I could point to and be like, oh, that's why I did that for 12 hours.
Yeah, no, listen, video games are great.
Let's dip into the question bucket before we call it a day here. There have been a couple that, did I miss something about pizza making here? Or is this just related to our pizza conversation?
We talked about pizza stones.
Yeah.
At some point. This was a tangent off of the the northeastern Ohio pizza chain conversation.
Yes.
So there's a couple people writing in and like pizza stone thoughts. And I'm just, this intrigues me, the way it's phrased. This phrasing intrigues me. From Ian. People have mentioned it already, but it sounds like the solution to David's cracked pizza stone conundrum is maybe ordering a pizza steel. The meta around internet pizza making changed a few years ago.
There's a meta.
When someone, this is exactly why I was like, what? I must know. When someone realized you could essentially chop the sides off a cast iron pan and you get a pizza steel, which holds heat longer and puts it out faster, meaning it should stick less and crisp up and blister your base nicely. The main benefit, though, is that they don't break. Pizza stones can easily be broken in transit, like the unfortunate David found out, but also through temperature shock if not treated properly. Yes. You hear horror stories of people preheating pizza stones in the oven on high and then putting a frozen pizza on it, causing it to violently explode. Hope this helps any other lowly pizza tarnished out in the wilds. Yeah.
Sorry, I just got really. We've gone this podcast without any tangential stories. Can I talk about thermal expansion for 1 minute?
Yes.
When I was in high school, I was doing a science fair project. Was looking at the generation of bismuth crystals. Bismuth is it's a really pretty metal that basically forms in these like really gorgeous geometric patterns with some really, really incredible coloration to it. It's absolutely gorgeous. It is also a heavy metal right after lead. And so it is slightly toxic to people. Thermite is produced by combining aluminum with a certain set of basically aluminum shavings with a certain kind of oxide. You can make it a ton of different ways. There's a ton of different oxides, the most common of which is iron oxide. Iron oxide and aluminum, mix them together, heat them up, you will make thermite. It'll melt through anything, right? So I was in a science fair using a hot plate to melt an aluminum pot full of bismuth because the melting point of bismuth is extremely low. It's about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we were melting this, and then I go to walk away from the hot plate, which is a aluminum ceramic hot plate, which is designed to be the subject of thermal shock, right? That's why it's a hot plate. It's designed to handle thermal shock. So I walk away, and then I hear a crash behind me and turn to see chunks of aluminum ceramic flying across the room. And I turned to my science teacher. I was like, what the fuck just happened? And she was like, I don't know. I later did some Googling. One of the things that can produce thermite is bismuth trioxide. Bismuth trioxide is the oxidized form of bismuth that creates the coloration of the crystals. What had happened was a little bit of bismuth trioxide had gotten onto the aluminum ceramic hot plate, and it was enough to just barely react, and basically the ignition was hot enough because the thermite reaction happened. It was just one little spot that was like basically too small to see, but there was an ignition point where the thermite lit, and that like 2,000 degree jump was enough to thermal shock the aluminum ceramic and basically detonate it in the middle of this fucking science fair room. It was one of the oddest things that has ever happened to me. That was my quick thermal expansion story, and why I was reacted with horror at the idea of a pizza stone obliterating itself when you put a pizza on it, because I know how violent. Pizza. Yeah, a frozen pizza on it, because I know how violent thermal expansion can be.
What are you doing at that point?
Pardon?
Like, why are you putting a frozen pizza on a pizza stone?
My guess is you've forgotten it's in there. So the thing, so my pizza stone, so my oven keeps such poor temperature that there's 2 pizza stones that just live in there to hold temperature, because otherwise, I actually don't know what temperature is going on in there, right? So but that also means that if you're gonna keep them in there, whatever you're putting in, if it's cold, has to go on the wire rack off the pizza stones, not directly on them. But yeah, if you're just oh yeah, chunk, in it goes, and then next thing you have an explosion. I've cracked a couple pizza stones for sure. They also just sometimes they just crack. Still usable if they got a big fracture in them, if you are mostly using them for temperature keeping. If you're putting stuff directly on them, that's a different different thing.
Then you gotta get a new one.
Yeah.
Or you can get one of these steels.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah.
So, was that cast iron though? So I would need a cast iron sheet?
Basically, to cook it
It's
up.
a lot of weight to throw around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fine.
Yeah.
You're a strong Zachney.
No, but also the whole thing, okay, so the thing about stuff won't stick. Cast iron is kind of one or the other. Either stuff doesn't stick magically to the cast iron, or it sticks incredibly to the cast iron, and you are beyond fucked.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine anything worse than now. I've got a big cookie sheet size thing of cast iron and a pizza I desperately need to detach from the cooking surface, and it's just not releasing. That right there is my vision of pizza hell. At least home pizza hell. We also got we got a number of good emails about keycap sets. But wait, this isn't the same Ian, is it? No, it isn't. It's a different Ian. Wow. The Ians are killing it this week in the question bucket.
Thank you, Ians.
Ian writes, long time listening, first time I think writing, and this is a doozy. Apologies in advance for the wall of text that is almost exclusively for Robin Wren. I'm not going to read the whole wall of text, don't worry. But y'all have been talking about keyboard stuff on the pod recently, and there was some question as to how much hiragana legends and sub-legends on keycaps are just weeb shit. I'm here to say that it's like 99% just weeb shit designed by people who have no interest in co-designing keycap sets with members of the Japanese keyboard community. Most of the relevant keycap sets, in particular GMK-made sets, but also DSA, SA sets produced by Signature Plastics, are produced by Western English-centric keyboard community and are designed by people from the West to be manufactured by a Western manufacturer, GMK or Signature Plastics in Germany and Washington, USA, respectively, and sold, usually through group buy, by vendors who exclusively sell to people in the West. Pretty much anything that gets produced and sold through Mass Drop, which is where I bought those fucking samurai keycaps, due to their policy of insisting on being the only vendor for the keycap sets they produce. I didn't know that. That's a hell of a sales term. Only vendor for the keycap sets they produce. They barely have availability in Europe. Shout outs RIP to the members of the Waypoint Discord outside of the US who want to get keycap sets in the drop owned MT3 profile, let alone in Asia or elsewhere. So the most charitable read for sets like GMK Red Samurai, noted on the pod, designed by Red Suns, or GMK Laser, extremely popular, very William Gibson, I am envisioning the future as dominated by Japanese industry, cyberpunk influence set, designed by a Brazilian designer who goes by Me Too, is that they might potentially be attractive and usable for Japanese diasporans as a secondary audience, but are primarily for the target audience of Japan's Cool Japan initiative. People in Japan trying to get the sets produced and sold through drop tend to have to use proxies to get those sets, and do, but it'd be pretty tough to claim that any of these things are produced for the Japanese keyboard community. That was like, I didn't realize that like drop had such a my way or the highway approach to sales.
Yeah, basically that's kind of what happens when you have a hyper enthusiast market, which is what the keyboards are, and you have like emerging centralization within that hyper enthusiast market, is that you get like, especially with like Drop's profile, because the MT3 profile is, I believe, owned exclusively by Drop. And so there are keycap profiles that are similar to it, that are open source, but like there is to some degree like an amount of corporatization going on in the space. But yeah, no, it's a messy bummer. That the industry is kind of organized like this. It's both the benefit and immediate consequence of intense decentralization. Is the regionalization of these different brands and like even aesthetics, and the ways in which like that can link to certain cultural perspectives around like what is and isn't cool, and like, ooh boy, is the Orientalism, as this person says, extremely bad.
Ian also notes, Japan has one of the only physical location keyboard hobby stores I know about. Yushikobo. May we all be able to walk down to the keyboard store of our dreams one day. And they have this Instagram.
Oh, shit.
Oh, I would love to look at this.
Yeah. It's like not the, it's not as really the endless variety that like Drop promises, but like it looks pretty cool. Like all the stuff looks really neat. Also, the idea of going down to the keyboard store, man.
Yeah.
There'd been a keyboard store in Brooklyn, things would have been real different.
Fucking imagine that future.
Oh,
Oh
look, there
God.
it is.
This is such a cooler version of like, I don't know, individual stores fucking rule. And I love the version of, because I went to over the weekend, I went to like a camera specialty shop in Brooklyn that is like caters to vintage cameras and specifically like Polaroids and film cameras. that was super fucking sick. And I walked in there, I was like, this is such a better version of what stores look like and are, because it was just like 7 people in a room picking up objects and being like, pretty cool, right? And other people being like, yeah, that is pretty cool. Is that 18 different kinds of film in the corner? And the answer was yes. And it was just like sick as shit. Individually owned hobbyist spaces generally rule. And are actually a very good place to find community. Shouts out.
By the way, Ren, I wasn't going to read this one, but your discussion of accidentally having a dangerous chemical reaction in class does bring this one to mind from Josh, the Piltdown Man Garner. Look, that's how Josh signed it, so I'm going to put that handle out there. The Piltdown Man. Okay. What's that mean? It's
basically it's a particular archaeological, I believe it's one of the first, it's a very well preserved
the Piltdown Man.
Body.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yes, that was actually totally
like
fake.
a recovered specimen.
Yeah, it was a recovered specimen, but it was also fake. Basically someone tried to be like, this is it's a missing link style thing. Like, this is a different branch of human evolution.
Right.
Here is what it looks like. It was actually just made up of skull fragments and like was 100% a hoax.
Not one of those legit things that we haul out of a bog now and then.
Yes.
All right. So Josh writes, in the latest episode, Ren asked Patrick and Kato if they had any crazy professor stories. While I wasn't asked, it made me think about one of my favorite professors from undergrad. I'm not sure how this goes for mentioning names, so I'll link to his IMDb page at the end, and you can decide. I don't think we want to use this name, so we'll leave it aside. I had this professor for Physics 1 and 2, and he's one of the better professors I had at making things understandable. This was back in the days before DVR and streaming had really entered our lives, probably 2000, 2001. So my roommates and I had the TV going in the background. One of us was just flipping through the channels and landed on some sort of UFO show on the Discovery Channel. As we're watching, who pops up but our physics professor? My roommate was in the same class. We immediately got more interested in the program, and I suppose if I wanted to make the story more interesting, I'd say we were working on physics homework, but I can't really remember. The next day in class, we mentioned to him that we saw him on TV, and he asked us which program it was. I don't think we remembered which alien program it was, but he let us know that he'd been on a few different ones. He also let us know that he would write reports for NASA that he didn't have the clearance to read. It kind of added to how fun he was to learn from. In an unrelated and separate occasion, he also nearly electrocuted himself in front of our class. He was doing a demonstration on the energy stored in a capacitor. To do this demonstration, he charged up a 1 farad capacitor, which is about the size of a large energy drink can. Then shorted it with a screwdriver.
That's a really big capacitor. As someone who's blown up a capacitor before in an engineering context, that's a really big capacitor.
That's an alarming size. He then shorted it with a screwdriver, which, if you've ever seen such a demonstration, is quite impressive. After doing this, he decided to see if the cap would hold a charge so he could do it again. He grabbed one lead from his DC power supply, then the other. His body convulsed. Then he was able to drop the leads. The classroom was deathly quiet. After a moment, he started laughing, letting us know he was okay, and we could chuckle too. Then he proceeds to say in a somewhat joking voice, "I could have died there." Anyway, that's just a story about one of my more memorable professors.
That's great.
A good weirdo in an engineering or physics program is one of the most fascinating people you will ever meet in your entire life. I love good weirdos so much.
This is delightful. I remember one of my science teachers talking about, like, the school wouldn't let him show these videos, but he found like a series of educational like physics videos that were like, he was like, I don't know what these guys are doing, but they're like all underground guerrilla like physics like in like videos. And one of them was just like, hey, you want to see what happens when a giant like a giant like meter-sized cube of sodium gets dropped into the water in the bottom of a quarry. And so it's like them like trespassing into a quarry and like unloading a huge thing of sodium from their car and like taking the coverings off it and hurling it into the quarry and then basically blowing up the quarry pond
This is
at the bottom.
This is every
my
single
God.
fucking weird engineering. I had an engineering teacher in high school who this is the exact shit that he would do, like down to a T. And just it's always fun to encounter just a big. That was the person who I believe in a previous episode of the podcast I described as me falling asleep in his class and him wrapping me in his big fur-lined denim jacket. And so I woke up and he said, "You looked cold." Just the sweetest man I've ever fucking met. A massive weirdo who played rugby in college just in the US and blew a ton of shit up for fun.
Fantastic.
And would help us blow shit up for fun.
We can all be so fortunate to know ourselves that well. So that is a wrap on today's episode of Waypoint Radio. If you want more from Waypoint, you can follow us on Twitter at Waypoint and Facebook and YouTube at Waypoint Vice. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Zachney. Patrick.
At Patrick Klubik.
Ren.
You can follow me on Twitter at Ren or Raven.
Kato.
At _Kato_appears.
You can also check out what we published on waypoint.vice.com. This past week, as Patrick mentioned, he wrote a story about the end of E3 and the relationship he and his dad had around it at the start of his career. Cam also wrote an essay on Norco, which is well worth reading, and we'll be discussing that game more, I think, in the coming week. We've also been streaming a whole bunch thanks to Waypoint Plus. Thanks to the folks who've signed up at waypointplus.com. Lately, we've been streaming Midnight Ghost Hunt, which was an odd little stream on Friday. I do not think we were good at it. It was a more competitive prop hunt in some ways, and we struggled mightily. We got into a game with some ringers, and it went real poorly. This week, Patrick and I are taking another dip into Weird West, and then Ren and I are going to play some Halo Wars too. Deepen our appreciation of the Halo TV series.
I would like to Kato, you can leave this here or put it at the beginning of the pod. I don't care. I would like to make a public apology. I'd like to make a public apology for misremembering some lore details from Halo. Specifically, I was wrong about the assault rifle caliber. You know what, folks? That's a really good point. It is just standard NATO caliber rounds, and I apologize thoroughly with all of my heart for having misremembered the specific rifle caliber.
Well, hold on. The more operative point was that the propellant, the velocity was different. Does that hold true?
Now I have no trust in myself.
Because we were trying to answer the question of why do Master Chief's bullet throwers work and everyone else's don't? Like, goes back to the games. Why do you need this expensive man in the big suit if you can just shoot him? He's just shooting them. So these are questions we need the answer to.
These are questions we need the answer to, and I would like to publicly apologize for my slight misremembering of some lore details.
Maybe
Please
Halo
forgive
Wars will have a deep explanation of this. Maybe there'll be a level where
the
it's
man,
like, you have...
The man with the suit has a shield. The suit's so big because it got to make a shield.
The shield, yes, the shield helps, but let's be real. Like, you know, it buys you a few seconds where you get perforated.
Yeah.
But still, like, I would like to know why can nobody get a handle on the Covenant until the man in the suit shows up? That's a major question mark for me. Anyway, if all of that sounds good, or you just want more Waypoint, you can go to waypointplus.com and subscribe. Not only to get access to our premium feed, but you're also helping support Waypoint and everything else we do here. Our theme music is by Bowen. The track is Miss You off the EP Pale Machine. Learn more at waypoint.zone/BOEN. For now, we are calling time on this Tuesday's show. We'll talk to you again on Friday. Until then, fuck capitalism. Go home.
back to the pod mines. Tink, 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 tink. That's the sound of me chipping away at the rocks in the walls. Tink, tink, tink,
Hey, Weird West has that mechanic too. If you like chipping away at inert rocks, Weird West has a lot of that too.
I love inert rocks.
Oh, do you get a pickaxe in that game and then you hit that to get because
you can smelt the ore
to upgrade,
become,
right?
The ore becomes like bar ingots that can be used to upgrade stuff, but also it's poorly laid out, so it's really easy to accidentally convert ingots back into ore, which I don't know why you do, but you can. It's like now you want to that thing you just smelted, yeah? Do you want to unsmelt it? And then you're like, what? And then it's like, all right, it's now pieces again, except less pieces than you started with. Fuck
No.
it. I hate it.
How do you unsmelt?
No.
I've watched a lot of Forged in Fire. I don't think I've ever seen someone
add
unsmelt
rock.
anything.
You add rocks, just smash them into there.
Just get some other, now put more shit back in it. Yeah. All right.